Captain Rachel Moore sat in the command chair of the Pioneer, staring at the flickering hologram that displayed the distress signal. The message was simple, yet chilling. "We are dying. Help us." The transmission was coming from the homeworld of the Rethar, an ancient and once feared species whose empire had long since fallen into decay. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. The Rethar had been a threat to humanity in the early days of space exploration, a race that believed in conquest, subjugation, and war. The human victory over them had been hard won, and the scars of that conflict still lingered. But as Moore considered the message, something gnawed at her, the desperation in their tone. The Rethar, proud and unyielding, had never shown vulnerability before. To send out such a plea meant they had reached the end of their rope. The decision wasn't easy, but she knew what she had to do. "Prepare to jump to Cathar," she ordered, her voice steady but resolute. "We're going to help them." Lieutenant Tyler Gates, the Pioneer's second-in-command, turned from his station. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" The Rethar. He didn't need to finish the thought. The history between their species was filled with violence, and for all the advances humanity had made, there were still those who remembered the scars of the past. Moore nodded, locking eyes with him. "I know, but that doesn't change the fact that they're asking for help. We can't just leave them to die. Not when we have the power to do something about it." Behind them, Dr. Amelia Harris, the Pioneer's chief bioengineer, adjusted her glasses, a small frown creasing her forehead. "I've been reviewing the signal," she said, her voice calm yet analytical. "The frequency is encrypted with a level of sophistication I haven't seen from them in centuries. They're desperate. And this virus they're dealing with, it's not something I've ever encountered before. This could be a real threat." Moore turned to her, meeting the scientist's gaze. "That's why we're going. We need to find out what's happening. If it's biological, we'll have to move fast." Tyler glanced back at the empty, starry expanse on the view screen. "I just can't wrap my head around it. All the other races abandoned them. The Corans, the Shyle, they've left Cathara to rot. Why are we different?" "Because we're human," Moore replied, her voice steady, unwavering. "And that's what sets us apart. We're not going to turn our backs, no matter what's happened before." The ship made its jump to hyperspace, the stars stretching and warping as they sped toward their destination. As the Pioneer hurtled through the void, Moore leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Could humanity really save the Rethar? Would they even want their help? And if the Rethar's fall had been caused by their own violent history, was there any point in trying to fix it? Moore didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: if there was any hope left for the Rethar, humanity would be there to find it. The Pioneer emerged from hyperspace just outside the orbit of Cathara, the once proud homeworld of the Rethar. Rachel Moore stood at the bridge window, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the planet below. It looked like a world on the brink of death, vast cities crumbling into ruins, a sickly grey fog hanging over the surface. No sign of life except the faint glow of a few barely functional space stations. "Approaching the Rethar capital, Captain," said Lieutenant Gates, his voice tinged with the same disbelief that had been growing since they arrived. "No traffic, no defensive shields. It's almost like the place has been abandoned." Rachel's heart sank. This wasn't the Cathara she had read about in history reports. This was a ghost planet. "Send out a signal. We need to make contact," she said. A few minutes later, an encrypted transmission came through, flickering and crackling in the static-filled air. It was a Rethar female, her form tall and regal, despite the obvious wariness in her eyes. Her voice, though clear, carried an undercurrent of strain. "I am Dara Kethrin, leader of the Rethar Coalition. If you come in peace, we welcome your aid. If you come to conquer us again, turn back now." Rachel's gut clenched at the words. She'd been prepared for suspicion, even hostility, but hearing the pain in the Rethar's voice left her uneasy. The last time the Rethar had encountered humanity, it had been in battle. "We are here to help," Rachel replied, her voice steady. "We received your distress signal. What's happening on the surface?" Dara paused, and the faintest flicker of doubt crossed her face before she regained control. A plague. It started weeks ago, suddenly, with no warning. The Rethar are dying, and no one knows why. Rachel exchanged a glance with Dr. Amelia Harris, who had been studying the signal closely. Her eyes were intense behind her glasses. "It's not a natural disease," Dr. Harris said, speaking as though she were thinking aloud. "The symptoms: rapid organ failure, high fever, and total immune collapse. It's engineered." "But by whom? And why now?" Dara nodded, her expression grim. "We are an old race, Captain Moore. We have many enemies and many secrets, but this is different. We don't know how it spread so quickly, or why it's so effective." "We need to understand more," Moore said, her voice soft but firm. "We can help you, but we need to get to the source of the infection. Where can we find the origin?" "We have a research facility on the outskirts of the capital," Dara replied. "It's been abandoned for years, but it's where we studied our past biological warfare experiments. Perhaps there's something there that can help you." Moore didn't like the sound of that. Biological warfare. It was one thing to help a species in distress, but quite another to risk becoming entangled in the dark legacy of their military history. Still, if there was any chance to stop the plague, it had to be investigated. "Understood," Moore said, turning to Dr. Harris. "Prepare the team. We leave in an hour." As the team prepared to descend to the surface, Rachel's mind raced. She had read about the Rethar's warlike past, their brutal expansion across the galaxy. But could they really be the cause of their own destruction? Had their ambition finally caught up with them in the form of this deadly plague? And if it was something they'd created, would humanity even be able to trust them once it was over? The answers lay beneath the surface, in the heart of a forgotten facility. And Rachel Moore knew there was no turning back now. The Pioneer's shuttle descended through Cathara's murky atmosphere, the once vibrant planet now shrouded in an eerie, sickly pallor. The shuttle's engines hummed in the tense silence, as Captain Rachel Moore and her team prepared for the unknown. Outside, the landscape was a desolate stretch of ruined cities, their towering spires reduced to broken skeletons of steel and stone. "We're heading straight for the facility," Lieutenant Gates asked, his voice tight with concern as he peered out of the small viewport. "That's where the answers are," Moore replied, eyes fixed on the planet below. "But keep your guard up. This place is ancient, and from what Dara Kethrin told us, it's been abandoned for decades. We don't know what we're walking into." The shuttle shuddered slightly as it passed through a thick layer of clouds, and soon they were above a sprawling, decrepit complex, an old research facility built into the side of a jagged mountain range. A sprawling maze of rusted metal and cracked concrete, it looked like something out of a nightmare, left to rot long after its creators had abandoned it. The shuttle landed with a jolt, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The team disembarked, the planet's air heavy with the acrid smell of decay. They were greeted by silence, broken only by the faint hum of distant machinery that seemed to still be running despite the years of neglect. "Stay sharp," Moore said, motioning for everyone to spread out. Dr. Amelia Harris, the bioengineer, was already setting up her scanning equipment, eyes scanning the air for any signs of biological contamination. Gates and Sergeant Marcus Steele, a grizzled veteran who was the team's security expert, kept watch as Moore and Harris led the way inside. The doors to the facility had been sealed tight, but it was clear they hadn't been maintained in a long time. With a quick motion, Harris bypassed the old security system, the doors creaking open to reveal a darkened corridor, the air stale with the scent of long-forgotten technology. Inside, the walls were lined with abandoned medical labs, holographic terminals flickering weakly as if in a last, desperate attempt to stay alive. The team moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the hollow, silent halls. "This place is like a tomb," Gates muttered, voice low. Moore didn't respond, her focus on the facility ahead. They finally reached a central hub, a massive chamber filled with rows of sterile white containers, some still glowing faintly. The central terminal blinked to life as Harris powered it on, her fingers flying over the controls. "Here it is," Harris said, her voice rising in both excitement and dread. The Rethar were experimenting with genetic modification, enhancing their soldiers' abilities. And then, biological weapons. This facility was their ground zero. Moore's stomach turned. If the Rethar had engineered this plague, it wasn't just a disease. It was a weapon unleashed upon their own people. And now, humanity was here, standing in the ruins of a past they had long since abandoned. "Can you isolate the cure?" Moore asked, her tone hardening. Harris's face paled as she read the data. "It's not going to be easy. But, yes, there's a sequence here that could work, but it's going to take time. And we need to act fast before it spreads any further." Outside, the wind howled as if in warning. Time was running out. The wind howled through the shattered remains of Kothara's capital as Captain Rachel Moore and her team set up a temporary command centre inside the old Rethar facility. The air was thick with the scent of rot, but beneath the decay, something else lingered, tension, raw and palpable. Outside, the sky was a muted, oppressive grey. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Dr. Amelia Harris sat at the terminal, her face bathed in the pale glow of the screen as she worked to isolate the cure from the complex genetic data. Lieutenant Tyler Gates paced nervously, his eyes darting between the windows and the equipment. He had never liked being in the middle of a political situation, and the diplomatic dance he'd witnessed between Captain Moore and Dara Kefrin earlier that morning only made him more uneasy. Dara Kefrin, the Rethar leader who had welcomed them, was both a reluctant ally and a potential obstacle. The promise of a cure had galvanized her people, but the fear of losing control had quickly set in. Moore had been cautious in her dealings with the Rethar, knowing full well that the Rethar's centuries of military dominance had bred deep distrust for outsiders, especially the human race. But the stakes had risen. Word had spread about the humans' presence, and now rival factions of the Rethar were beginning to mobilize. Some saw the potential for humanity to deliver salvation, while others viewed their involvement as an insult, a reminder of past humiliations. A fragile alliance between Dara's faction and the humans was now on the verge of unraveling. "I don't like this, Captain," Gates muttered, glancing out the window at the shadowed city below. "If we give them the cure, there's no guarantee that Dara won't use it as leverage to consolidate power. She's already playing us like pawns." "I know," Mo replied, her gaze hardening. "But we can't walk away now. We made a promise to help them. The cure might not be enough if we don't stabilize the situation first." Speaking of which, Gates said, "How much longer until Dr. Harris can synthesize the cure?" Harris didn't look up from her screen. I'm close. The Rethar's genetic material is complex, but it's coming together. We'll need to synthesize a batch for testing before it can be distributed. Moore turned to the communications console. Dara's expecting us to deliver soon. If we don't, we risk losing her trust, and that could split the Rethar into civil war. We need to act fast, but we also need a strategy. A transmission came through then, a garbled message from the orbiting fleet. Captain Moore, the voice crackled. There are reports of hostile movements near your position. The Rethar factions are already mobilizing. If you don't secure the facility soon, we'll be forced to intervene. Moore's pulse quickened. The stakes had just gone up. What had once been a race against a biological weapon had now turned into a war of wills between two civilizations. Prepare for extraction, she ordered, her voice cold with determination. We'll get the cure to Dar. But if anyone tries to use it for power, we'll take a stand. We're not here to choose sides in their war. We are here to save lives. In the distance, the faint sound of weapons fire echoed through the crumbling streets of Cathara. The price of redemption was higher than Moore had ever imagined. The situation on Cathara was spiraling faster than Captain Rachel Moore could control. The Rethar factions had begun mobilizing, and the fragile peace brokered by her and Dara Kefrin was starting to unravel. From the window of the old facility, Moore could see the distant columns of smoke rising from the capital. It was chaos. Civil war was brewing, and every hour they waited for the cure to be synthesized only increased the risk of full-scale violence. Lieutenant Gates stood at the comms station, his brow furrowed as he listened to the latest reports. Captain, the other factions aren't just gathering. They're coming for us. We have about 3 hours before they reach our location. Where's Dar? Moore asked, her voice tight with frustration. She's on her way, Gates replied. But she's not the only one. There are reports of a group led by Rathar Kell, one of the more militaristic leaders. He's pushing for a show of strength. He wants the cure, and he's not going to wait for a peaceful solution. The name struck a chord with Moore. Rathar Kell had been one of the Rethar military commanders during the last war with humanity. He was ruthless, known for his scorched earth tactics, and his belief that the Rethar could only thrive through dominance. To him, the cure wasn't a solution, it was a tool to regain control. We can't let them have it, Moore muttered, gripping the edge of the console. If Rathar Kell gets his hands on that cure, we're not just dealing with a plague. We'll be facing a new wave of Rethar aggression, and the whole galaxy will pay the price. Dr. Harris interrupted, her voice calm but urgent. Captain, the first batch of the cure is ready. But I need to test it before we distribute it. It's the only way to be sure it will work. We don't have the luxury of time, Amelia, Moore said. We need to give it to Dara now. If she can secure it, maybe we can buy ourselves some time. Before Moore could finish the thought, an alarm blared throughout the facility. The helm of energy shields flared, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons fire echoing through the air. They were under attack. All units, move out, Moore barked. Gates, get Harris to the shelter. I'll hold them off here. Tyler Gates hesitated, his gaze flashing between Moore and Harris. Captain, you can't do this alone. I don't have a choice, Lieutenant, Moore said, her voice low and determined. We can't let this place fall, not after everything we fought for. As the team scrambled to prepare for the incoming assault, Moore felt a sharp pang in her chest. This wasn't just about the cure anymore. The Rethar were on the brink of civil war, and the balance of power was hanging by a thread. She knew it was only a matter of time before they would have to make a choice. Save the Rethar, or save humanity. The sound of heavy boots marching through the facility's corridors grew louder, signaling that the enemy was drawing near. Moore gripped her rifle tightly, preparing for the worst. It wasn't just the Rethar she had to worry about anymore. She had to worry about who would control their future. And that future was looking more uncertain with every passing second. The facility shook as blasts from distant artillery tore into the landscape outside. Captain Rachel Moore's heart pounded as the sound of the approaching Rethar forces grew louder. Rathar Kel's forces had arrived. No longer was the mission about saving a dying species. It had become a battle for control of the cure, and the fate of Cathara hung in the balance. "Captain, we're getting more movement," Gates said, his voice strained as he surveyed the incoming data. "They've breached the outer perimeter. At least a dozen armoured units are approaching. We don't have long before they reach the central chamber." Moore nodded grimly. "Dr. Harris, can you finish synthesizing the cure? We need it now." Harris's hands flew over the console, but she barely looked up. "The serum is ready, but it's still in its initial phase. I'll need another few hours of testing to be sure it's safe. We don't have that kind of time, Captain." "Give it to me," Moore ordered. "If we wait, Rathar Chell will have it in his hands, and all of this will be for nothing. We don't have another option." Gates stepped closer, his voice low but insistent. "Captain, we're talking about the lives of an entire species. You can't just—" "I'm not giving them a chance to use the cure as a weapon," Moore interrupted. "We're humans, Tyler. We don't leave people to die when we have the power to save them." With a sharp exhale, Gates stepped back. He knew better than to argue now. Moore took the small vial from Harris, feeling its weight in her palm. A symbol of hope, but also a potential disaster. She turned to Sergeant Marcus Steele, who had been coordinating the defences. "We need to get this to Dara now." "Understood, Captain," Steele said, his voice as steady as ever. "We've got 2 squads securing the perimeter. We'll hold them off long enough for you to get out." As the team readied themselves, Moore couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her gut. She knew that securing Dara's faction was their only chance at ensuring the cure was used wisely. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how fragile their position was. Dara Kethrin was a leader, yes, but she was also desperate, and desperation often bred unpredictable decisions. "Keep tight, everyone," Moore said, as they prepared to leave the central hub. "We move fast, we move quiet, and we don't engage unless we have to." They made their way through the darkened corridors, the facility eerily silent except for the distant rumble of gunfire outside. As they reached the exit, Moore's communicator buzzed. It was a transmission from Dara Kethrin. "Captain, the situation's deteriorating. Rathar Kel's forces are pushing through our defences. If you don't get here in the next 30 minutes, we may lose control of the facility entirely." Moore's heart skipped a beat. "Dara, listen to me. We're on our way. But you need to promise me something. No one gets their hands on the cure unless we can trust them. If Kel has it, this planet will fall into chaos. You can't let him have it." Dara's voice was hard, almost resigned. "I understand, Captain. We'll hold the line. Just get here quickly." "Stay alive," Moore said, her voice low but fierce. "We'll be there." The team moved swiftly through the crumbling halls, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick walls of the facility. But with every step, Moore knew that time was slipping away. Rathar Kel's forces were closing in fast, and when they arrived, there would be no turning back. The gamble they were taking was as dangerous as it was necessary. And now it was a race against time, not just to save the Rethar, but to ensure that the cure wasn't used to ignite another war. Captain Rachel Moore's boots hit the cracked floor with a heavy thud as she and her team sprinted through the narrow, dimly lit passageways of the Rethar facility. The air felt suffocating, thick with the smell of rust and old machinery. Every corner, every darkened doorway, could be hiding a Rethar soldier, or worse, one of Rathar Kel's ruthless lieutenants. The tension in the air was palpable. 20 meters to the exit. Steele whispered, his eyes scanning every shadow with practiced vigilance. Moore nodded, feeling the weight of the cure in her pocket. It seemed so small, just a vial of serum, but its implications were enormous. If Rathar Kel got his hands on it, there was no telling how he would use it. The thought of giving this cure to Dara Kefrin, who had so far proven herself a reluctant ally, felt like their only hope. The comms buzzed to life with a crackling transmission from Dara. Her voice came through distorted but clear enough to make out the urgency. Captain Moore, we've lost half our defence positions. Kel's forces are closing in from the south. I can't hold them off much longer. You need to make a decision, now. Moore's jaw clenched. We're almost there, Dara. Hold your ground. Just keep them off us for a few more minutes. We can't hold them much longer, Dara's voice snapped. Kel's forces are too strong. If we lose this position, we lose everything. Don't give up, Moore urged, but she knew the situation was dire. They were running out of time. The facility's outer door loomed ahead, a faint glimmer of daylight visible beyond the cracked metal. Moore's hand hovered over her sidearm as they neared the entrance, the distant sounds of battle growing louder. The door opened with a grinding screech, and the team spilled out into the cold, wind-swept wasteland of Cathara's surface. What had once been a vibrant metropolis was now a ghost town. Ruins scattered in every direction, a testament to the Rethar's failed empire. Fires burned on the horizon, the remnants of battle between Dara's faction and Kel's. The wind carried the smell of smoke and blood. Overwatch reports enemy forces ahead, Gates said, his voice tight. We've got about 2 minutes before Kel's men reach this position. Moore motioned toward the distant compound where Dara had set up her command. We move fast. We can't stop. The team moved in a tight formation, their eyes constantly scanning for movement. But as they neared the edge of the battlefield, a sudden shout rang out. A familiar voice, one that sent a cold shiver down Moore's spine. Captain Moore. Stop. Rathar Kel stepped into view, his tall, imposing figure silhouetted against the smoke and fire. His sharp features twisted into a cruel smile as he levelled a heavy blaster in their direction. You should have stayed away, Captain, Kel called out, his voice echoing across the wasteland. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist the temptation to meddle in our affairs. Moore's heart skipped a beat. They had been so close. We're not here for war, Kel, Moore said, her voice unwavering despite the dread crawling through her veins. We're here to save lives. I'm not leaving until the cure is in the right hands. Kel's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward. And I think that's where you're wrong. You came here with the cure, but now you'll leave with nothing. Because I'm the one who decides who survives. Steele positioned himself between Moore and Kel, his rifle raised in a protective stance. Gates was already scanning for backup, but Moore knew that no reinforcements would reach them in time. This was it. And in that moment, she understood something far deeper than tactics or strategy. Sometimes, the greatest risk wasn't in the war you fought, but in the choices you made in the quiet spaces between battles. She glanced at her team, then back at Kel. You're wrong, she said quietly. You will lose this war. And before Kell could respond, the sound of heavy weapons fire erupted in the distance, drawing everyone's attention. It wasn't from Kell's men. It was from Dara's faction. "Move!" Moore barked. "Get to Dara, now." The battle outside the facility erupted into chaos as Captain Rachel Moore's team sprinted toward Dara Kethrin's last stronghold. Rathar Kell's soldiers, momentarily distracted by the unexpected barrage of fire, had slowed their advance. But they wouldn't be stopped for long. The odds were against them, and Moore knew it. Every moment counted, every step could be their last. "Stay sharp." Moore shouted as she led the charge, adrenaline surging through her veins. Behind her, Gates, Steele, and Dr. Harris pushed forward, their weapons raised, ready for whatever came next. The horizon was an apocalyptic blur of smoke and fire, casting long shadows over the broken cityscape. As they neared Dara's position, the sound of gunfire intensified. The Rethar forces, loyal to Dara, were holed up behind barricades, desperately trying to hold the line against Kell's superior numbers. But Dara's men were resilient. They had to be. The future of Cathara depended on them. "Captain Moore, we've got you covered," came the voice of Dara's second-in-command, a battle-hardened officer named Rilo. "Push through. We're ready." Moore barely acknowledged the shout as she reached the barricade. It wasn't until she saw Dara Kethrin herself that a brief sense of relief washed over her. The Rethar leader, once proud and aloof, was now a commander hardened by the weight of her people's desperate fight for survival. Her armour was scuffed, and her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with determination. "We've got one chance," Moore said, thrusting the small vial of serum into Dara's hands. "This is the cure. It's untested, but it's our best shot. Use it wisely." Dara took the vial, her fingers tight around it. For the first time since Moore had arrived, the Rethar leader seemed uncertain, almost hesitant. "You trust me with this?" she asked, her voice rough. "I trust you to make the right choice," Moore replied, her eyes never leaving Dara's. "But make no mistake, we need to end this now. We can't let Kell take this planet any further into the abyss." Dara nodded grimly. Understood. But before she could speak further, the unmistakable roar of Kell's forces reached them. His troops were closing in fast, and there was no more time to talk. The ground trembled beneath their feet as explosions rang out nearby, shaking the already unstable ruins of Cathara. Kell's voice boomed from the other side of the battlefield. "Surrender, Dara," he shouted. "You're outnumbered. Give me the cure, and I'll spare you." Mo's heart raced. Kell's offer was a lie. There would be no sparing anyone. This was a fight for survival, not negotiation. "Captain," Gates called out, "we need to hold this position until we can deploy the cure." Moore turned to Steele. "Secure that position. Harris, stay with Dara. I'm going after Kell." "Captain, no," Gates shouted, but Moore was already moving, cutting through the smoke and chaos, her weapon raised. Kell's forces were close, but Moore didn't hesitate. This wasn't just about the cure anymore. It was about sending a message. The Rethar had fought and bled for their survival, but they could not allow their future to be ruled by the likes of Kell. As Moore neared the front lines, Kell's troops began to shift positions. But then something changed. The wind carried the unmistakable sound of artillery, heavy cannons, firing from a distance. Dara's faction had called for reinforcements, and they weren't far behind. In the final moments, as Kell's forces hesitated, Moore made her move. She pushed forward, cutting through the battlefield like a force of nature, her team behind her, determined to end the war before it could consume any more lives. The moment she reached Kel, it was clear. This battle was no longer about survival. It was about redemption. And in that fleeting moment, Moore knew they had won.